And I'm never talking about albums I've never listened to ever again. I'm Colin. We're about to talk about the difference between rhythm and poetry versus hip hop. Like what I really believe it is, you know what I'm saying? You can go and check the last video I did in January talking about the difference between the both in my overall kind of thing. Like summing everything up, I had said that the rap artist in the rhythm and poetry section, they need to focus on like putting uh, more creative poetry, basically, because you can't really have rap without the poetry, man. I know a lot of old heads are trying to say like this is real rap, but that's just a bunch of nothing most of the time. Most of the time, like I know the legends, they've got rhythm and poetry, but you know what I'm saying. Hip hop is more like a brand. It did start off with DJ Kool Herc, who would start with the turntables. There was no real MCs over them, over the wax, none of that yet at the time for 1974. And yes, it did start off with more graffiti, breakdancing, but all that kind of fell off of it. And then now you've got like your main rhythm and poetry artists being the likes of Earl Sweatshirt, Kendrick Lamar, probably the biggest one. And then the faces of hip hop nowadays is your Future, Travis Scott, Playboy Carti, people that are really like building the brand. But what we're gonna be doing to understand the difference between them both, like rhythm and poetry and hip hop, is we're gonna talk about the top 100 albums from the 2020s decade, halfway through it, and try and understand like if this album was focused more on the hip hop side of things, whether it's like a brand or an aesthetic, and with the rhythm and poetry, they're more visible. You can have like big explosion, like Little Sims kind of projects, but let's just like see where I land. A lot of them I haven't heard. Like starting off with Last Rushi, Sisterhood. I assume with it being cloud rap and digicore, while there may be lyrics focused in the rhythm and poetry section, I feel like that's where I want to lie. But like with digicore, it could be very Blade, and I wouldn't say that Blade is rhythm and poetry. So by the looks of what we have in front of us without hearing the album, you said it was like a 79, meaning it's a 7.9 out of 10. I would say it's a hip hop album. So I didn't hear this one either, but I know who Backwash is. I assuming his name is Backwash. So Backwash is like it's like a screamo artist. He's on this album apparently dropped on Halloween, scary season. He's all like industrial, which means just loud for no reason kind of music. Horrorcore, same thing, just with like vivid imagery. And what that like horrorcore kind of does is, it does add more of that rhythm and poetry. And Backwash, if I'm saying his name right, does kind of talk about his mental, saying race, like politics, but like, and if he's got that horrorcore subgenre tagged onto the album, then it's possible he's leaning to I would say this is our first rhythm and poetry. Smino does have the lyricism, however, that R&B sound that he goes for and that pop rap stuff, basically just said the tags here. But I know that Smino is kind of more, he's like a laid back R&B artist more than like a hype, like trap artist, you know what I mean? You got songs on here like No L's. And of course, as I said basically already, it definitely leans more towards a hip hop sound than rhythm and poetry. Mo Mother and Billy Woods. Off the name, I'm saying rap. Brass, I assume that's rhythm and poetry, but that doesn't really tell me anything. The cover only really tells me something from the artist, Billy Woods, that this is definitely leaning towards more of the rhythm and poetry. Lil Shine, Losing Myself, I'm assuming hip hop just by the cover art. Apparently, Use rated it an 8 out of 10. 656 people. Westside Gun, Pray for Paris. Thank you. This is something I know, man. Like a nice, concise album, Allegedly co-rap, like a Pusha T. Westside Gun's brand does kind of come from his delivery and ad libs. does kind of point him towards more of the hip hop sound or the hip hop style. The lyrics that he kind of always puts down, especially for this album, I'm gonna have to go towards rhythm and poetry. He's more of a lyricist, but he does have that hip hop kind of thing because of the way that he's branded himself. Pusha T is a lyricist, but with the features like a Don Toliver and Lil Uzi Vert, the production from Pharrell Williams, Kanye West, like these are people that are all hip hop way before the rhythm and poetry. So I'll say, even though that it does have the rhythm and poetry going for it, it is kind of altogether, it's more hip hop. Right, I've talked about what I've talked about. I had to change the type of project that we'll see to more of an LP, meaning we'll see the albums more like the deluxes and EPs. They've changed the order where the albums are placed based on that. The ones that we haven't talked about are going to be talked about. The ones that we have, you already know what I said. Blue, the color blue. Jazz rap, conscious hip hop, boom bap, West Coast hip hop. This kind of means like, I believe he is from California, I want to say. I mean, there's a big giveaway here, but he might not even be there. I'm kind of aware who Blue is, but I don't listen like that. And what I understand from Blue is that he is a rhythm and poetry artist. You know what I'm saying? This right here in 96 is probably hip hop. I did actually hear this. Of course, it's got the Alchemist production. Boldy James is the artist over the top of that production. This is rhythm and poetry. See, like, this is the albums that I know, man. I'm already knowing that it is hip hop. It's definitely based around its production. The features are very commercial. You got Beyonce on there. You've got a lot of these are like resurfaced Yeezus songs, or is it Yeezus or Yandy? All of those throwaways from Kanye West, like 2013, Modern Jam especially. You even have like a Westside Gun who is mostly known for rhythm and poetry, with his hip hop brand. But Travis Scott as a whole in Utopia definitely leads towards more of hip hop. A$AP Rock, I'm already assuming that it's rhythm and poetry based on what I've heard so far from the guy. Common, rhythm and poetry, but hip hop artist based on like how big he is and like the culture for movies. You know what I'm saying? Stuff like this. Boldy James and the Alchemist, Bo Jackson, gangster rap, rhythm and poetry. Malcolm Pray for High Tea, abstract hip hop, East Coast hip hop, jazz rap, rhythm and poetry. Logic Ultra 85, I believe he is talking about the fantasy story the way that Lupe Fiasco would. Maybe not on that level, but like it's probably one of Logic's best. That being said, rhythm and poetry. McKinley Dixon, for my mama and anyone who looked like her. By the title alone, I'm assuming it's rhythm and poetry. The jazz rap says that it is. Conscious hip hop confirms that. Southern hip hop just kind of tells us where it's from. So like Danny Brown Quaranta, it does have like this hip hop approach around it. You know how Danny Brown's production is, but that adds to his brand. And he also has this feature that's a really old head. Like I don't remember the name of the artist, unfortunately, but he was really talking the way that Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5 would be talking over this. Storytelling, so that rhythm and poetry, kind of lyricism, but this being an album from 2023, pulling from the culture from back then, that kind of leads it to being the hip hop, like that. The album Quaranta is hip hop overall, but of course, rhythm and poetry, lyricism. Malcolm, I did see this, like, it's got some more commercial instrumentals. So it's got that hip hop approach, but abstract hip hop tells me that it's probably leaning more towards lyricism. And East Coast hip hop tells me the same thing. I'm probably just gonna go for the safe option and say that it is rhythm and poetry. Almond Hammer, We Buy Diabetic Test Strips, rhythm and poetry. This is like the old heads that can really go again. Vince Staples, this is an album that I have heard multiple times. Thank you. This is Dark Times. I prefer the actual self-titled. I prefer the self-titled album over this. But like, it's got some really good commercial bangers, like Little Homies. But while it does have the hip hop production, Vince is very low key and doesn't really have a brand. However, he does have that show on Netflix now. There's so much hip hop about it that I'm probably gonna have to just say that it is hip hop. Car, Long Live Car. The Thief Next to Jesus. The abstract hip hop tells me, of course, Car is a rhythm and poetry artist. East Coast hip hop tells me that like he's from New York or something shit like, some shit like that. Drumlist also confirms that kind of lyricism approach. Car, rhythm and poetry artist, long live, rest in peace, God bless. Genesis Owusu, Smile Away No Teeth. Neo Soul says that it is heading towards that hip hop approach. That experimental hip hop kind of tells me that same thing, but I know that he does have some kind of like really in depth lyrics, or like he tries to push his pen as hard as he can. Little Sims No Thank You. Hip hop artist because of how commercial she is. Like one of the biggest right now. Especially for us. Conscious hip hop tells me that she's going for a lyricism approach. With rhythm and poetry. UK hip hop. So I would say she's probably going for more a hip hop type of style, man. Just with rhythm and poetry lyrics. Conway the Machine, very low key kind of guy. I have heard this, but only like in December of 2022. East Coast hip hop tells me that he's going for New York song or whatever. Conscious hip hop is rhythm and poetry, of course. Boom bap is the same thing. Hardcore, I feel like this is rhythm and poetry. West Side Gun, we've already had this conversation, man. A lot of the elements of a West Side Gun song are very hip hop with the way that he is branding himself. He's probably the most branded in Griselda. But he's still got like that low keyness of a rhythm and poetry artist. Lupe Fiasco Samurai. This is the one where you're saying that if Amy Winehouse was a battle rapper, that fantasy storytelling kind of leads him to being the rhythm and poetry, like one of the most creative poets in rhythm and poetry itself. Lupe Fiasco. This is a rhythm and poetry album. Billy Woods and Kenny Segal, Maps, rhythm and poetry. And I've listened to that as well. That's like more like the headphone kind of rhythm and poetry too. Just with how dynamic everything is, just like how panned it is. Oh yay. This is the last page, man. And I'm looking at it and it seems like I can get in depth with a few of them, man. King's Disease 3 by Nas. As we said, one of the biggest to ever do it right now. Like, probably not even one of the biggest, just like someone, if we're talking more specifically for rhythm and poetry, then we say one of the biggest. So I would say, even though he is very mainstream because of Illmatic, that kind of Kendrick Lamar, where he was saying he wants to be the biggest underground artist, that's kind of what Nas is. Well, you wouldn't really know who Nas is if you wasn't listening to rap constantly, or just indulging in the community of like the internet, social media, Instagram, YouTube, stuff like this. So East Coast hip hop is hip hop, but boom bap, rhythm and poetry conscious. As to that lyricism focused rhythm and poetry. Blue and Exile Miles. Jazz rap says that it's rhythm and poetry. Conscious hip hop says that it's rhythm and poetry. West Coast hip hop, but being the Blue and Exile, I would say that it is rhythm and poetry. Alright, this one, it's got the Disney thing. Is it Disney? That is not Disney. Pop rap and alternative R&B. I'll say it's hip hop. Don L. Conscious hip hop says that it's rhythm and poetry. Pop, rap, hip hop, political hip hop, rhythm and poetry, meaning this is a rhythm and poetry album. Alfredo, Freddie Gibbs, and The Alchemist. So it's very like concise. I do enjoy this album. Obviously, being a Tyler the Creator fan, my favorite is Something to Rap About, and the way that Freddie Gibbs is talking over there is very rhythm and poetry, because he's saying like God made him sell crack to give him something to rap about. It's poetic, man. So I gotta say. I gotta say that it is rhythm and poetry. The number 20 spot, Cities, Gum. Abstract hip hop says that it is focused more on lyricism. Experimental is hip hop. Drumless is rhythm and poetry. Rhythm and poetry. McKinley Dixon, Beloved, Paradise Jazz. Jazz rap, rhythm and poetry. Conscious hip hop, rhythm and poetry. That means that it is rhythm and poetry. Also, I've known about this album since 2023. Not when it dropped though. With it being so low key, that's a rhythm and poetry kind of approach. Kendrick Lamar GNX, this is the biggest rhythm and poetry artist. Especially right now, he's bigger than Drake right now because of like the streams. But like specifically this one, it's pulling a lot of West Side culture. There is some rhythm and poetry songs like Man of the Garden, Reincarnated, but because of the overall like very inspired, influenced like the West Coast culture. For Kendrick Lamar, this is very hip hop. Run the Jewels 4. Hardcore hip hop says that it is leaning towards a actually more rhythm and poetry style. Political confirms that. So it's rhythm and poetry album. The groups though, hip hop kind of thing, especially with this logo right here. I've seen him make an appearance in WWE crowds hitting that logo. Tyler the Creator, Chromacopia, my goat. It's very, I would just say off the bat it's hip hop, but he has some in-depth lyricism. But when you've got a song like Sticky, you're definitely working towards more of a hip hop sound, and it's very influenced too. It's definitely influenced. His most, I would say, a good example of his rhythm and poetry though happens to be off the song Billy Woods Aethiopes. Don't know what that means. But I know who Billy Woods is. This is my first ever introduction to the guy. Abstract hip hop, rhythm and poetry, experimental hip hop, East Coast hip hop, conscious rhythm and poetry. This is Billy Woods, very low key, rhythm and poetry. Clipping visions of body being burned. Horrorcore means that it's some bullshit. But actually, I know that it's good storytelling, so that's rhythm and poetry. Experimental hip hop says that it's hip hop. Industrial tells me it's loud as shit. So I'd say that it's rhythm and poetry. I don't know this one. Cities of Eve, accompanied by a blazing solo. Experimental hip hop is hip hop. Abstract is rhythm and poetry. Drumless, focus on lyrics. It's probably more rhythm and poetry. Tyler the Creator is back, man. You can never just kick him out like that. At number 12, this is definitely my favorite artist, man. Call Me If You Get Lost specifically. It does have a lot of hip hop influences. To say his most rhythm and poetry is more like a Wilshire manifesto. Then you've got songs like Sweet Out Before You Want to Dance, Corso, Lumberjack, where he's bringing braggadocious. He's talking about jewelry, cars, the brand of hip hop or the culture of hip hop is on the side of this album, man. Especially if you're from the West Coast. I don't remember the jazz rap though. JPEG Mafia LP. I'm aware who this is, and I'm actually a fan of Scaring the Host, just myself, you know what I'm saying? But like Scaring the Host and I Lay Down My Life For You. So I'm knowing that he is focused lyrically. And he's more laid back than Danny Brown. Like when it comes to Brandon. The experimental hip hop says that it is hip hop, or hardcore hip hop kind of tells me it is. Might be more focused towards lyricism. And Glitch Hop tells me it's hip hop, but I would say it's hip hop, but there's definitely that low keyness and lyricism of rhythm and poetry. Black Thought and Danger Mouse. Cheat codes. Black Thought is more of a Black Thought is definitely a rhythm and poetry artist. I believe he is not the most famous artist from the Roots, but definitely supposed to be the lead artist from the Roots. Even though that might actually be Questlove, the drummer. Danger Mouse. I'm confused on who Danger Mouse is because I want to say it's Dead Mouse, but for hip hop, I don't know too much about that. I apologize. East Coast tells me it's probably hip hop, but lyricism based. Conscious hip hop, rhythm and poetry. Denzel Curry, one of my real goats. Flawless discography. This is not my favorite album from him, but it's probably a lot of yours. This is more. There's some hip hop where he goes for like that screamo with Rico Nasty's involvement, Josiah's involvement. These might be people that aren't actually on the album, but I believe that is the truth. That these people are on the album. My favorite version of this album though happens to be like the Cold-Blooded Soul Band. Is that what it's called? Like the live jazz version? It's what I was listening to way more than I was listening to the original version itself. The conscious hip hop. Damn, is it Blood Orange or something like this? Like, who is it? Bro, like, me just pulling out Cold-Blooded Soul Band tells you I was telling you the truth. Just off the top. That's the only time I've ever, like, seen them. Unfortunately, I would like to see more because they did so good on this. Of course, there is, as I said, there's hip-hop there, but there's rhythm and poetry. My favorite out of the two albums, like, versions, happens to be the Cold-Blooded Soul Band version. Live jazz, awesome. For every single song, like the Ill specifically. But like, conscious hip hop, rhythm and poetry. It's rhythm and poetry with a commercial kind of accessibility. Boldy James, and Sterling Tolles. Manga on McNichols. Oh, Manger on, okay. Jazz Rap tells me it's, Boldy James tells me it's off rhythm and poetry. But Jazz Rap confirms that conscious also, and Gangsta Rap. They all confirm my thoughts on that. I have heard this, but only really like skimmed it. JPEG Mafia, I Laid Down My Life For You. This is something that I definitely did hear. It's on my end of the year list, like actual official end of the year list, but not official end of year list, and not just the honorable mentions. It's definitely more hip hop with the laid back kind of approach for rhythm and poetry. Injury Reserve. By the time I get to Phoenix, I've heard that title seen like covered so many times. Rest in peace to one of the members from this band, or one of the artists from this group. Experimental hip hop tells me that it goes for the rhythm and poetry. No wait, experimental hip hop goes for hip hop. Glitch Hop says that it is also that. Abstract hip hop is also that too. Oh, I know it's not rhythm and poetry. Experimental hip hop, and I've also heard like the one I've heard the most from it is like Ain't No Saving Me, which has that rhythm and poetry, but it's done with a hip hop approach. Kendrick Lamar, Mr. Morale, and The Big Steppers. I just kind of have to say like thank you for when I can talk about it again. There's a lot of hip hop on there. Like Rich Spirit is probably my favorite song off of it. Probably like my top. Rich Spirit is probably one of my favorite, like real favorite Kendrick Lamar songs. So there's a lot of hip hop. Talking about Kodak Black being a feature on there. Baby Keem's involvement. Of course, there are rhythm and poetry songs, especially like a "We Cry Together." But I'd say as a whole, it's for a rhythm and poetry artist and someone who I was claiming was the biggest. I would say this is very hip hop. It's very experimental as well. I believe the biggest example for the rhythm and poetry happens to be the Hot Bob 5 on the deluxe. I would say it's oh damn, it's so like in between. I would say rhythm and poetry, but there's so much hip hop involved. JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown, Scaring the Hose, experimental hip hop, hardcore hip hop, glitch hop. My favorite is like I believe it's it's a HOE, Heaven on Earth. My listening experience told me that this is very hip hop before it's rhythm and poetry. Little Sims, however, done in a hip hop manner. However, there's so much rhythm and poetry lyrics, especially with this album. It's hard to ignore and just pass it off that this is her most rhythm and poetry. So that goes with being rhythm and poetry, conscious hip hop. J.I.D. The Forever Story at number 2. Southern hip hop tells me like where it is, but conscious hip hop is a rhythm and poetry album. Is talking about how it used to be like Crack Sandwich, Cody Blue 31. That hold it way more for the rhythm and poetry. A lot of hip hop involves still being modern, but rhythm and poetry just done in such a creative way, low-key. I feel like we just talked about this. It had an answer, so basically the number 1 is J.I.D. The Forever Story. Alright, that being said, I've been Colum. Like, comment, subscribe. And I'm never talking about albums I've never listened to ever again. I'm just gonna make my own list. That, I mean, it really depends. Tell me which ones I'm really missing out on. Which is your favorite? If this rhythm and poetry versus hip hop thing makes sense at all. But apart from that, that's me. That's Colin. That's like the subscribe. That's whoever the hell you are. Goodbye. That's 100 albums. Spoken about for an hour, but probably chopped down into like 30 minutes. And bye.